Welcome to the second season of Trophy Moments and a Few Firsts with me, Keith Baldwin. Sponsored by Spikes Trophies, where you can reach Spikes at gospikes.com or one of the 3 locations in the Delaware Valley. Today, for my guest, I'm honored to have Peter Capolino, who is the founder of Mitchell and Ness Nostalgia Company. Born and raised in Philadelphia?
I grew up in Yeadon in Delaware County.
Okay. And I want to hear, it's a unique story, a success story that wasn't success all the way.
No, by far not.
And it turned into something that I don't think your father, who bought the company, would ever imagine.
No.
So tell us a little bit about Mitchell and Ness. It's a Philadelphia brand. It's an international brand. So how did you get involved with Mitchell and Ness?
Well, Mitchell and Ness was founded in 1904 by Pete Mitchell and Charles Ness. Pete Mitchell was a Canadian collegiate wrestler and also a great tennis player. And Charles Ness was from Scotland, and he manufactured golf clubs over in Scotland. In the turn of the century, Mr. Mitchell and Mr. Ness decided to merge the tennis and other sports with golf and created a company called Mitchell and Ness.
So how did your father get involved with Mitchell and Ness?
Well, my father happened to be born in 1904 in Formia, Italy. And Formia is between Naples and Rome on the Mediterranean side. It's a coastal town. And in 1913, there was a cholera epidemic working its way up Naples. And my father, his mother and father decided that they better escape from Formia to the U.S. They didn't have a lot of money. My father's father was a tailor. They actually left a daughter in an orphanage, which no one ever heard from again.
Wow.
And in 1913, they crossed the Atlantic. My father's mother died on the boat on the way over. My father gets to Philadelphia and starts working as a tailor. And then he meets another family and marries into that family.
In Philadelphia?
In Philadelphia. And this was 1917. By that time, my father was 13 years old, and he didn't particularly like the family that my father's father married into. And then he died. My father's father died. And my father was sort of left on his own by a third family that took over my dad. So he was actually on the streets of Philadelphia, and he was even boxing on the streets for money as a kid when he came across this store called Mitchell and Ness. And it was on Arch Street, around 12th and Arch at the time. And he went in and he said, if you let me sleep here, can I work for you? You don't have to pay me, I just want to sleep here. So Mr. Mitchell and Mr. Ness took pity on my father. My father's name was Peter Capolino. And they said, yeah, but we're not going to have any Sisto working for Mitchell and Ness. We'll rename you James. So starting from the time he was 13 until 1952, he stayed there his whole life. He got his GED at Temple University at night. And in 1952, he tried to buy Mitchell and Ness, which was successful. Mr. Mitchell and Mr. Ness had sold it to the Robert Evans family. And the Robert Evans family, after World War II, really didn't believe in sports, thinking it's not going to go anywhere, a sports store. And he bought it in 1952 and stayed there his whole life, and he died in 1978. I was born in 1945. I went to high school at Yeadon High School, and I went to Susquehanna University. Then I was in the U.S. Army for 3 years. I was an Army Corps of Engineers Army officer. Luckily, my officer candidate class, half of them got sent, or more than half got sent to Vietnam, but they needed 4 officers in Korea, and I got sent.
So you went to Korea?
I went to Korea. I was very lucky. So I spent 1968 and 69 in Korea. I often tell people that when Joe Namath won the Super Bowl on January 12th, 1968, it was my birthday. And I was up on the DMZ in a foxhole with a transistor radio listening to the football game. Little did I know that I would make a deal with Joe Namath in 2001 to make his jerseys. So I came back in 1970, September of 70, from the military and started working for my dad. My dad.
How old were you?
I was 25 years old.
But you'd worked in the store prior to that, right?
Oh, I worked there my whole life as a kid growing up. I was a stock boy, an errand boy, worked in sales.
Did you have dreams of taking it over?
No, my two older brothers I thought would come in and take it over, but they were not interested. They had other professions of their own. So it was just me. And I thought, well, I'll give it a shot, because I was on target to become a high school teacher here in Philadelphia. I got my teaching credentials at Temple, and I wanted to stay in the academic world and teaching world. So I had no background, had no idea what I was doing, and came to work for my father. He got ill around 1973, and I kind of took over a little bit after that. But he passed away in 1978. And I always say to people, like a good son, what you always do is you drive your father's business into bankruptcy. So
How old were you at this point?
Well, by 1978, I was like 30 years old.
Okay.
You know, and 32 years old. I really didn't know what I was doing, but I did know how to write uniform specifications, because we were a major high school and college outfitter for all the sports teams.
So
in
you
the
were a team outfitter.
We were a team outfitter. Yeah, so I had relationships and learned how to write specs for softball, football, basketball, baseball, and even hockey. We did a lot of uniforms. Outfitted the University of Pennsylvania, Villanova, Temple, probably 400 or 500 high schools in the region. And I was the guy who wrote the specs to the manufacturers. You're probably aware of companies like Wilson and Rawlings and Russell Athletic, you know, and Sand Knit and all of those companies. So part of my job was to write all the details of how a manufacturer would make the uniform and
for
ship
the
the schools, you know. Now, the interesting thing, though, is growing up, I grew up inside the Philadelphia Eagles locker room. A lot of people don't know this, but from 1933 through 1963, until Jerry Woolman bought the Philadelphia Eagles, we outfitted the Eagles in everything.
I never knew that until I did some background research on.
Yeah, I mean, everything from helmets all the way down to the shoes and the jerseys. And if you go to the Football Hall of Fame, you'll probably see Norm Van Brocklin's jersey in there. It's got a Mitchell and Ness label on the back. So
tell us about the story that I came across when you were 15 years old at an Eagles game. 1960, I think it was?
Yes. So I was at the Eagles game in 1960, sitting in the end zone. This
was the championship
game, December 26th, the day after Christmas. And I was there, and I got to see the game. I got to watch the whole game. And somebody from behind me took a picture for, I think, a Miller Lite calendar. So the back of my head has been all over the United States from that game at 60. But I would also go to Hershey, Pennsylvania.
No, but before that game, before you went into the stands, didn't you put something onto the helmets or a face mask?
Oh, no, I did that. That wasn't before the games.
Oh.
That was weeks before the games.
Okay.
We would recondition the Riddell helmets. Yeah, so I helped Freddie Schubach, who was the equipment manager in 1960, drill the holes and put new face masks on for the championship game.
Then you saw it.
And then I saw the game, you know. Oh, and, a lot of collectors, when I tell them all of the original things that I've touched and worked with, and in those days you took them for granted. You didn't realize they were going to be collectibles. I mean, people are beside themselves when I just talk casually about every model of helmet, every model of face mask, all the shoes, the jerseys, all this stuff. So in those days, the world was so much different. And plus, you weren't even allowed to make or sell pro team jerseys. They were just for the teams. And in the old days of college, you couldn't do that either. It was a very proud thing for a varsity football player to have his jersey and not have every fan in the stands wearing it. So it's completely flipped now.
So how do you go from working for your father and then getting the business, and you alluded to basically running it out of business, to turning it into the nostalgia company that everybody knows?
Well, it was born of desperation. By 1983, we had a very high prime rate in the federal banking system, 79, 80, 81, and I was borrowing money at a higher rate than my profit margins, and that was a big mistake.
That doesn't work too well.
It didn't work well. So by 1983, I scaled down the business. I fired almost everyone in the company.
How many people did you let go? Have to let go?
Well, I probably it's a hard number to remember exactly. I would say probably about 24 people let go, And we were all the way down to me, my wife, a wonderful loyal employee who's still at Mitchell and Ness, Joanne Graham.
Wow.
And maybe one other. And we crawled into this little space at 1229 Walnut Street, which used to be called Reedmore Bookstore.
Okay.
What I didn't realize was Reedmore was the largest collector of dated periodicals in the United States. Magazines and books, he had over 1.5 million. So I still had a lot of debt. So in the early 80s, the creditors would call me a lot. I'd go up into the stacks and look at all the old sport magazines. They had every sporting news that was ever written, the Sport magazine, which was before Sports Illustrated, and everything you can imagine. And I started looking at them, and then it was just fate interjected itself. A man came in to ask me to repair a couple of Major League Baseball jerseys. One was a St. Louis Browns, and one was a vest, a Pittsburgh Pirate vest. I think it was Bob Skinner. I can't remember who the St. Louis Brown guy was. So I took them over to the local manufacturer, Maple Manufacturing, which you know of that company. And I asked Martin Serkin, the owner of the company, if he thought he could repair them. And he said he could. And as I was there and looking around, killing some time, I saw all these rolls of wool flannel. And I said, Martin, what do you do with all this wool flannel? He said, well, nobody wears wool flannel anymore. They went to double knits in 1970. As you might probably know, the Pittsburgh Pirates were the first ones to come out. He says, I just use it for jacket linings. So I looked at the wool flannel, and I looked at these two jerseys, and I said, you think you could make me 6 of each of these in addition to repairing the real ones? And I'll offer the guy the real ones. I'll fix the real ones for free, and I'll offer him a replica so close that people won't be able to tell the difference, so he can keep the real ones in a cedar closet. And so I did that, and the guy was just delighted. He got 2 replicas that were identical to his originals.
Do you know this person? Or
no, I have no idea.
It's just a thing of fate.
Thing of fate. Now, I hope he's listening, or I've told this story in the past, so maybe, and he left. I put 5 jerseys out, and I put them out at I forget, $50 or $75 each.
Which back then would be expensive.
Expensive. And they sold out instantly. People had never seen anything like this before. So I thought, well, let's make a few more. So I went over and I saw the white and navy pinstripe and the white and red pinstripe. I said, let's make some Phillies and let's make some Yankees jerseys and see what happens. So I did. I knew how to spec jerseys. I had the original wool flannel that was there, and I also had access to a library of magazines.
All the periodicals that you could get the information.
They gave me the information, the style of the numbers. All the people who are collectors and are real lovers of uniforms, they know details that are unbelievable that the average fan would pay no attention to. And I decided that I'll pay attention to those details.
This was before the internet.
Yeah, there wasn't no internet going on at all. So it was just.
So the research had to take you a lot of time.
I had access to so much so quickly, and there's only parts of the research that was really hard. That is all the sleeve patches and memorial patches and anniversary patches that go on jerseys that people look at or don't look at. But I knew without all of that total accuracy, it wouldn't convey what I wanted to do.
So would you go back and did they have back in the time these articles and then have images that you would get or descriptions of it?
Descriptions of it, and in Sport and Sports Illustrated, lots of color pictures, which was very helpful. But to do the early uniforms and the research, I had a researcher named Paul Polgarin, and Paul is known in the world of sports research, but not he and Paul has passed away. I would send Paul to the Philadelphia Library. He would go all the way to the Library of Congress, Temple University Library, and I would have him go and say, let's just say, well, one of the most difficult ones was the 1937 Brooklyn Dodgers. I'd say, look at the newspaper the day before the game, the day of the game, and the day after the game. And the reason for that was, in those days, the newspaper writers were writing very, very visually, so you could try to comprehend what was on the field. And they would describe the new uniforms. And that was the year that I discovered that the Brooklyn Dodgers came out in Kelly green and khaki uniforms in their color. So it was Kelly green and white at home, Kelly green and khaki on the road, and a dark green warm-up jacket. And so I'd seen all the black and white pictures, but I had no way of knowing the colors until we researched and read these articles from major periodicals, newspapers.
Was that a one and done year?
Yes, it was one and done. The Dodgers were, like all baseball, very superstitious. They were terrible, so they changed the color, you know. But that's just an example of what we would do. But, you know, color photography wasn't created until 1938, 39. So you didn't. There was things that had been colorized, but the colorization things were not accurate enough for me. You know, so I did that, and you know, it's one of these things. Nothing else was selling. I will never forget.
So it was a matter of survival.
Oh yeah, in 1984, Reebok came out with some shoes, and I still had a Reebok account, and they looked like dance shoes or like disco shoes.
I remember.
And I said, these will never sell. Get rid of this Reebok account. I sent them all back, and then a Foot Locker opened up around the corner
And sold them.
It sold them. So, you know, so I had some vision in some places and was totally blind in other places.
So after the two jerseys that you do for this gentleman, and you sell a few, and then you start to think, so how do you start creating a line?
Well, you don't. And people always ask me this, like in marketing classes. They want to know what was my marketing strategy. I had no marketing strategy. What was your plan for growth? I had no growth plan.
It was survival.
It was just survival. And so when I said, well, I'm going to make all the players that I like. And I'm not going to make the players I don't like. Now, how do you like that for professional start? So I started making them.
There is you focus on what you love to do. Mm-hmm. And you love those people or those jerseys.
Those jerseys and those players.
So you focused on what you loved.
Yeah, I did. And I thought other people might like it too.
And they happen too.
They happen too. One time, a guy named Phil Bear, and I think Phil has passed away, he comes into the store in like 1986 or 87, and he sees my Ted Williams 1939 rookie jersey, which was a little difficult because there's certain patches in 1939 that all baseball wore, but I had it very, very accurately. Phil Bear comes in, and this is like a hard-nosed financial guy, and he's like shaking. He said, I'll take that at any price. I'll take that. I said, why? He opens his wallet, and he had an autograph of Ted Williams from when he was a child in his wallet.
Wow.
So I sold it to him, and then he told his friends, and other people would tell other people. Finally, and I know this is a question you were going to ask me toward the end of the show, but if we could do this in chronological sequence.
That's fine.
The high point of my life, the
trophy moment.
The trophy moment of my life was a guy named Dave Baldwin, I think.
No relation to
Excuse me. No. He was a writer for Sports Illustrated. He comes in, and he's blown away, and he writes an entire story on me in Sports Illustrated in the baseball issue in July of 1987. That issue came out, and I had by that time researched and made about almost 90 different teams. I was just going crazy with baseball, and no license, no rights, no idea what was going on.
So you weren't official.
Oh, no. So he writes this story, and a friend of mine, Tom Hempel, who was in the advertising business, he was the creative director for, I forget, one of the law firms here in Philadelphia, the advertising firms. He says, Peter, you're going to get thousands of phone calls. You don't realize this. I said, well, what do I do? He says, you hire a phone bank. So I hired a phone bank. Everybody was based out somewhere in Utah. And people started calling. The first day, I sold 1,800 jerseys.
Now, how many did you sell?
I hadn't sold
up to that point.
I don't think
18?
Maybe I hadn't sold any. So I geared up. I got Maple Manufacturing together and a few other people, Powers Manufacturing and other manufacturers that we know in the sporting goods industry. And I said, something's going on here. I need your help. So they came and stepped up to the plate and helped me. We eventually sold about 3,000 jerseys
Off of that article.
And the bells and alarms went off at Major League Baseball. So they threatened to sue me. And I had John Binswanger, a very prominent real estate guy here, who was a customer and a friend. He wrote me a reference letter of my good intentions and not meaning to take anything from baseball to Major League Baseball. And they called me up to their offices.
In New York?
In New York, and said, bring some samples, we want to see what you're doing. I go up there with Fran.
Were you scared?
Yes. Was I scared? I thought they were going to put me out of business. Yeah. So I go up there with Fran, and I lay all this stuff out, and their eyes were just bulging, like they'd never even thought of recreating their history. So they said, what's your business model? And I said, well, I think I'll have a business model of recreating the history of Major League Baseball through the evolution of the uniform. This came to me.
Yeah, you're just off the top of your head.
The evolution of the uniform, because that's what I was doing. And I said, I can do it right. I said, I can make them as good as what you're going to see at the Baseball Hall of Fame in Cooperstown. And I showed them all these uniforms. They, to their credit, granted me a license right away, although they made me pay back royalties on all the ones that I had sold and made me document how many, and I don't know how much good documents I had. Yeah. So I got back in the taxi. We got out of there with Fran, and I looked at Fran and I said, Fran
being your wife.
My wife. I said, Fran, we're going to get rich. I said, I can't believe this.
And how many years before that you were basically out of business?
83.
So 4 or 5 years?
Yeah, 4 or 5 years. We came back and we introduced something called the Cooperstown Authentic Collection in 1988. It came out in April or May of 1988, and that was the beginning of it. And from 1988 through 1997, it was a little bit restrictive. Major League Baseball was very protective of what their licensees were doing, and they didn't want anybody to copy them. So I had an exclusive deal. No one else could do what I was doing in baseball. They protected me, but they excluded me from getting licenses with the NBA, the NFL, or the NHL. They didn't want me doing for them what I had done for baseball. It's a very competitive world up in New York.
Okay.
You know. So finally, some of the management changed in New York at Major League Baseball, and the new people and younger people who were helping to run it realized that I couldn't survive with just one license, especially since Major League Baseball had a strike in 1994, 1995. Baseball didn't get started until like the end of April.
So that had to almost kill you.
Oh, yeah, it did. In 1996, I think Jeter was a rookie, and the Yankees went to the World Series, and that kind of brought baseball back. But I still was struggling with just one license, and my costs were getting high. Now, to their credit, Major League Baseball let me out of this exclusive proprietary deal. And so in 1998, I got a license with the NBA.
Had the NBA contacted you prior to this? Or did
Yeah,
you go? Yeah,
I knew people at the NBA, and some people at the NBA were working there, were executives at the NBA, had been working for retail chains and knew of my product, you know. And they said, yeah, Peter's got something here. Let's exploit this. So I got the license in 1998 for the NBA, which was very, very exciting for me because I'm a huge Sixers fan and Philadelphia Warrior. I'm old enough to be a Philadelphia Warriors fan. I know more about the Philadelphia Warriors than I know about the 76ers.
Oh, really?
And I remember being at your museum up there.
The Philadelphia Sports Hall of Fame
and
Museum.
Seeing some, and you even have some stuff like an athletics jacket there with Mitchell and Ness label.
Yes. Yeah. Yep.
Sure, I remember that. So they gave me the rights, and the NBA worked differently than Major League Baseball. The NBA controlled all of their retired players, so I didn't have to make individual deals with each individual player in the NBA. The NBA provided me with the names. I paid all the royalties, and people probably usually don't know this. All the jerseys that I've made my whole career, the player got a royalty and the league got a royalty. So it was not like I could just say, let's make some Mike Schmidt jerseys. Mike Schmidt would get his piece. And so in the NBA, I just paid the NBA a significant royalty, and they distributed. Although Charles Barkley, I think to this day, thinks I owe him a lot of money. And I keep explaining to Charles, I'm not allowed to independently make your jersey and make a deal with you. Because I'm sure he knows players in other leagues that I've made significant royalty payments to. And he's like, well, I'm not getting nothing from Mitchell and Ness. So he finally, I think, has forgotten about it.
So how do you go from, now we're in sports, hey, you're on MTV and you're with some hip-hop, you're Jay-Z, and how does that happen? And doesn't that explode it?
It started to grow. If you want to know numbers, I'm glad to share numbers. My biggest year was 2003, where we did 40 million. 2002, we did 22 million. 2001, we did 12 million. And in 2000, we probably were doing 7 or 8 million. So that 40 million held until the hip-hop craze and fashion part of it was over by 2007. But I didn't do any of that, nothing. What happened was, and one of the things I didn't realize is celebrities like to have two things. They like to be the first to have something and no one else has it. That ticks off one thing with me. The other thing is, and I have found this to be so true from every rapper and artist that I've met to all the athletes all want to be musicians. The musicians all want to be athletes. And where's a good spot to meet and serve the love of what you love, Like one time I asked Eminem, I said, are you M or N?
What was the answer?
He said, I'm both. And he was a big Detroit Lions fan, so now he's walking around.
So he had one of your Lions jerseys.
Yeah. And that happens with a lot of guys. The story that I like to tell the most is Sammy Baugh, slinging Sammy Baugh. And I've told this before, so I hope I'm not repeating too much. But I like to make jerseys of players that I like. And at my age, and I also did a lot of football research. So I said, we're honoring all these famous players like Jimmy Brown, who was very difficult to work with, or just so many people are so demanding. But I said, I think Sammy Baugh deserves his own jersey because Sammy Baugh, who in his career as quarterback of the Washington Redskins, one year in the 40s, he led the league in punting average. His average wasn't broken until 2020, I think.
Wow.
No. One year, he led the league in interceptions. He was a safety. He had 11 interceptions. 2 other years, he led the league in touchdown passes and yardage. And I said, this guy's unbelievable. So I chose a jersey that I liked the style of the number. I said, this is cool. It was like a 33 with all these little points on it, So I made it for Sammy, And one cute thing about Sammy is that when his royalty checks go to, and Sammy has passed away since, his royalty checks go to Sammy Baugh, south of the mountain, Rotan, Texas.
And that would find him.
Oh, yeah, all the time. So I make this jersey for Sammy Baugh. And I don't know how this happened because I've never met Jay-Z. I know Jay-Z's been around. In fact, he's a partial owner of Mitchell and Ness now.
Really?
Yeah, I'll tell you about that later. Anyway, somehow Jay-Z gets a hold of the number 33 jersey. Now, it could have been Big Rube. You're familiar with Rube and Harley, Big Rube?
Yep.
Who was my marketing guy and was the guy that I sent out to like all the shoots for MTV and VH1 and BET. And he would be there and he would make friends, and a lot of the rappers liked Big Rube. And he would distribute jerseys to them. He actually sold them to them, you know. These guys didn't want free stuff. They thought, oh, if I get it for free, anybody can get it. I'd sell it to them at full price. I wouldn't give them any discount. So
and they're doing the marketing for you, basically.
Yes. So Jay-Z does this video called Girls, Girls, Girls. It was like in 2000, 2001. And he wears the Sammy Baugh jersey throughout the whole video. Not only did it become my #1 best-selling in football, it became my overall #1 best-selling. Forever. And I was sending Sammy royalty checks for 18 months that amounted to anywhere between $2,000 to $3,000 to $5,000 a month in royalties. And we were selling thousands. So Sammy calls me one time. Oh, and a little aside about Sammy, he was the very first coach of the New York Titans, which was renamed as the New York Jets. So he called me one day, and he says, in his southern twang, he says, Peter, he says, I have no idea why you're sending me so much money, but I just wanted you to know it's more than I ever made in the NFL, and I want to thank you. And I said to Sammy, you're a legend, Sammy. You'll never be forgotten. I never had the heart to tell him why.
So he never knew why you were sending him?
Absolutely not. And there was no reason to tell Sammy Baugh that at all. You know, I wanted him to really believe that he was like the most living legend in football.
So I'm going to try to wrap this up a little bit, but you go through this, you sell it, you become a Hall of Famer in the National Sporting Goods Association.
Thanks to you and your brother who nominated me.
And was that a trophy moment for you?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, my father was treasurer of the National Sporting Goods Association.
I did not know that.
3 years, 1971, 72, 73. And he would have been so proud of me. And when I got nominated, Greg did all the. Greg is Keith Baldwin's brother. Greg did all the legwork and pulled it all together. And I was in a little bit of shock because I'm a relatively small businessman compared to the people that are in the Hall of Fame.
So who did you go in with that year?
I went in with the guy from Obermeyer, Klaus Obermeyer, who's 100 years old. And we were in the ski business, too, in the 60s. We ran the retail and rental operations at Camelback in the Poconos. I
did not know that.
For years and years. So I went in with Klaus, and he did a video thanking. And then I went in with the guy who was the founder of Skechers. And he was too ill to show up. I think his son made a speech, you know. So here I am, with companies that are 1,000 times bigger than me, going into this Hall of Fame,
well,
and
you changed sporting goods culture by what you came across and what you founded. That's pretty amazing.
It was a great ride, but I have to give credit to my wife, because without some of the things that she helped guide me.
How many years have you been married?
41 years.
Okay.
So Fran Dietrich is my wife's name. She actually graduated from University of the Arts in
closing soon.
1975, and that's very sad for all of us. So my wife said to me, she said, Peter, you're an old fuddy-duddy. You're making all these historic jerseys for people your age. You know, who cares? Make some vintage jerseys for much younger people who will remember their childhood. And I said, well, what do you think I should do? And she says, you know that rainbow Houston Astros jersey that Nolan Ryan wore? Yeah. I said, I bet they would love to have that. So I had Powers Manufacturing in Waterloo, Iowa, make the first Nolan Ryan. And then I was also making Dale Murphy of the Atlanta Braves, double knit Dale Murphy. So a group in Atlanta called Outcast The next thing I know, I see them performing in Nolan Ryan and Dale Murphy jerseys. I'm like, what's going on here? And there was a retailer who opened in 1998 named, the name of the store was Distant Replay, and run by a good friend of mine, Andy Hyman. And I didn't realize that Atlanta was such a hub for rappers and entertainments. They would all come through his store. And he seeded, I use the word literally, he seeded more of my jerseys with historic rappers and entertainers than anyone else.
Wow.
And it just kept growing. And then I kept scrambling around. And luckily, because of my background of knowing how to spec and make uniforms, and because for years I had relationships with manufacturers in the sports world, the athletic world, I could gear them up and continue to make stuff for me. Now, it got so big and so costly, and this is a fact of business life that I can't avoid. I needed to have lower costs in order to pay all of my royalties, what was going on. I was essentially, and try and imagine this, in your business, say, taking 20% of your gross, 24% of your gross sales and giving it to someone before you get to keep a cent. So that's when we started to make stuff offshore. Yeah, and I started making stuff in Korea, Taiwan, in China, and then eventually we also started making stuff in El Salvador and the Dominican Republic. And my wool, my gray and pinstripe wool, I had made in a woolen mill called La Luz in Mexico City. The white wool was still made at Pendleton in Portland, Oregon. But that's a fact that exists right now. I'm sure the current Mitchell and Ness doesn't make one thing in the United States. But that's also true of everybody else.
Yeah.
Even the Nikes. I mean, Nike, people think Nike is the world's largest sport. They don't own a sewing machine.
Yeah, I know.
They contract all over the world, as does...
They're great marketers.
Yes, as does Adidas, as does Puma. The clothing game is in that arena, and there's no getting out of it.
So you've done so much. You're now retired. Mm-hmm. I'm going to ask you one final question.
Okay.
What's a first that you've always wanted to do? Something that you've always wanted to do. You've done so many things that you haven't done. And will you do it?
That's a hard question. I'm 79 years old. I've traveled the world because of this. To be very honest with you, and I know you want to give you an honest answer.
That's all I want, honesty.
There's nothing that I can think of that is a real hole or a gap or something I wanted to do and I've never gotten to do.
Well, that means you've lived a very fulfilling, long life.
Yeah, and I'm happy.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, with that, I'm going to end. And thank you very much, Peter, for
it's a pleasure
being a guest on Trophy Moments and a Few Firsts.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
All right.